Good to have you here this morning. I guess we say we should start, but we're late, but everybody's still standing in the back, so that's all. We'll get their attention. Let's see. I heard the voice of Jesus say, "Come unto me and rest. Lay down, thou weary one, lay down thy head upon my breast." I came to Jesus as I was, weary and worn and sad. I found in him a resting place, and he has made me glad. Does anybody know of a song that has more comforting words than that one did right there? That one does right there. I love that song. Normally we sing it as an invitation song, and I just wanted to sing it because I'm going to talk just a few minutes about what we talked about last week, and it had a lot to do with that verse right there. Cody was here, but he's gone now. But Cody did a good job last week pointing out that we were burdened down by our sin, and Jesus can relieve us of that burden by forgiving our sins, which is completely true. I'd like to talk about a little bit farther down the line from that, in that sometimes we're burdened down not by our personal sins, but by just life in general. As we go out here and we'll have health problems, we'll have family problems, we'll have maybe we're in poverty, or we have sickness or illness, and we got aches and pains, and we're burdened down like that. And those are caused by sin too. If you get right down to it, when the Lord created the world, he created it perfectly. There wasn't any sickness, there wasn't any kind of poverty or anything like this. The world was perfect. And then as sin came into the world, or the way I feel about it, as sin came into the world and we lived through the ages, we've done things to our body that's made them more prone to sin. Not that we've done things individually, of course we may have, that affects our own health, but just down through the ages, our bodies have changed into something that is not as perfect as it was when God made it. And our society has degenerated. In other words, we just had Adam and Eve, and God is all it talks about in the garden. But they had a perfect society until sin came into it, until they sinned. And now we've got countries that are at war with each other. We've got rulers such as the ones in Venezuela and places like this who just prey on their citizens. We've got all these things that affect us. And sometimes we're burdened down by those kind of things. And coming to Jesus, he makes a sight right there. He says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Says, and when we labor and weight, we're heavy burdened, we go to Jesus, and which way do I point this thing, Dave? You're right. And he made that comment about my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And you think about you're heavy laden and you're burdened down. And here's Jesus telling us to come to me and take my yoke. He's wanting us to put on more weight, is what you're thinking about. You say, well, I can't pull what I got right now, and you want me to help you pull yours. But yokes are used for a lot more than just taking the burden away from somebody. When you look at, you've seen, I've never used a yoke of oxen. I don't know. Ev may have, but I haven't. Okay. Not you, okay. But we know we have the passage in the Bible. We have the passage in the Bible that says, be not unequally yoked to unbelievers. And there's a reason for that, in that the unbeliever, if he's a very strong individual, very strong personality, he could lead you someplace that you shouldn't go. But now we're talking about being yoked together with Christ. And you might look at if you had a yoke of oxen, if you had a yoke like that, and you had a big ox on one side like that, and you had a little goat down on the other side. Who would be pulling all the weight? The ox would be pulling the weight, wouldn't it? That's what Jesus is saying. Come to me and take my yoke upon you. Not that he wants you to bear his load. He wants to share your load. And Cody did such a good job last week talking about how Jesus relieves us of our sins. And sometimes we just got burdens that are maybe caused by the sin of the world down through the ages, things that, illnesses and everything we have. All right. And also, after my lesson last week, Maria back there, she came to me and asked me a question. Very, very good question. One that deserves to be talked about a lot. And I made the comment that I didn't think God was going to destroy the earth on account of man. He was not going to curse the earth again on account of man, like he said in Genesis, the 8th chapter. And she said, well, if it's not because of man, why is the earth going to be destroyed? And you think about it, it's a good question. It's a good question. And she was referring back to, and Cody can pronounce it a lot better than I can, apocalyptic literature. It's a way of understanding things. We see it in the books of the Old Testament, such as Daniel, Ezekiel, and Zechariah, where it talks about the Lord coming in the air and things being destroyed. And it's there in abundance. And it's a type of language that the people in this time period, around the time of Jesus, first 3 or 4 centuries after, it was a language that they were familiar with. And I don't know, I sort of think about it. Did you have any kids that were interested in Harry Potter when they were growing up? You didn't? Or are you lying to me? No, I don't think so. My daughter's 47, and she even told me one day, I didn't realize it, she said, I read a Harry Potter book when I was in high school. Yeah. But anyway, do you have any kids that are familiar with Harry Potter? You have kids. And are you familiar? Do you understand it? Some of it? I don't understand any of it. I look at that and I say, man, this is crazy. You know, sorcerers and wizards and stuff like this, and I don't understand. They look at this stuff, and they can look at these games they have on their videos, our grandkids. Look at these games they have on their videos, and they have the armies and all this going out and stuff like this. You say, what's that all about? And I said, man, they're talking about sorcerers and wizards. I don't know if they should be talking about that or not, Yet in reality, they understand that because it's the language that they talk. And were you enjoying, when you were growing up, did you read a lot about it?
I thought it was super dorky.
Did you really?
Yeah,
okay.
No, but that's not.
Oh, you were from California though, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I told her it was more Wizard of Oz.
Well, yeah, Wizard of Oz, yeah. But, they see that as good versus evil, as a way of talking about things that are good versus evil. Even though it uses sorcerers and wizards and stuff like this, we'd say, man, but it's good versus evil. They look at these things and they understand it. When we were, maybe more towards Mark's age over there, C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia. Yes. Yeah. No, I don't think it's witchcraft. It's a way of they're talking where they're really talking about good versus evil. Well, I don't like them either. But what I'm saying is we don't understand them. You think about it's witchcraft. It's witches and wizards and stuff like this. But it's not what they're talking about when they read these things. It's not when you look at C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia. where you had the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe, where the lion is a representation of Jesus. And it's there, and once you understand what he's talking about, there's really a great spiritual message in these things. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we don't understand it because we haven't seen it. This apocalyptic literature, which when Cody taught Revelation last year, I missed the first couple of classes. I'm sure you probably went into this pretty heavy, is the way it's taught, about these ways they have of talking about things. When you look at the words they use, if you look at like 2 Peter 3, verse 10. 2 Peter 3, verse 10. I put all these pink tabs in here so I can get to it real fast. I'm still not getting to it real fast. 2 Peter 3 and verse 10 says, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a loud noise, and the elements will be dissolved with fire, and the earth and everything that is done on it." And the older translation said will be burned up. Most of the newer translations will say will be disclosed, will be uncovered. In other things will be made plain when it's there. And you read about that, and you see Daniel, and I can say in Ezekiel and Zechariah, Matthew 24, when it talks a lot about the stars begin to fall and everything is happening right there. And we've come to realize something, and most of the time it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem when it's talking about these things. There's a good example of this. During this time period, I've got a note down there, it says the Dead Sea Scrolls and the books of the Apocryphal. There are books that are in a lot of the Catholic versions of the Bible. They're called books that were written in that intertestament period between Malachi and between the time of Jesus. And a lot of those books were written in this type language that's there. They were used to it. It was like the kids reading Harry Potter. They were used to this type of language, and they understood a lot of what they were saying right there. There's a book that gives a really good example. I don't know if you use this or not, Cody. When you talk, did you talk about the book of Esther?
I didn't get into much of it.
No, but the book of Esther itself.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I don't know if I did much about it or not.
Well, the book of Esther, anybody remember basically the story of the book of Esther? There was a young Jewish virgin who was raised by her uncle Mordecai. It was time of captivity when their Babylon was over them. And he was raised by it, and the king had got mad at his bride, his queen, Vashti, and had exiled her more or less. And the wise men of his court came to him and said, "Well, you need to get you another queen. So why don't you send out this statement that says, we want all of the young virgins to come forward, and I'll look at all of them, and I'll pick out the one I want." Most beautiful. Most beautiful, that's right. So they went through this, everybody got, and Esther was this young Jewish maiden who had been raised by her uncle Mordecai. He said, "Well, why don't you go and do this? Maybe it'll help out our people if you get close to the king." So it's very pretty, and they went and they did all the stuff, and they took her before the king, and anyway, the king picked her to be his new queen. And it goes how, there's the big story there, everybody remembers, where the king was going to kill all the Jews, and Esther intervened, and some things happened, and very, very plain story. Very plain story and easy to understand. It never mentions God one time in it. But you can see God's hand in everything for putting her where she was to help his people. But it never mentioned it. Someplace during this intertestament period, there were additions made to the book of Esther. Some guy, they don't know who he was. And like I say, you can look at a Douay version of the Bible, and you can find it there. These additions that were made there, I think a total of 107 verses were added to the book of Esther as addendums like things. I'd like to read you some of these things because this explains a lot about this language that we're talking about. And everybody sort of got the story in their mind of what the story was all about. So there were, I think, 5 or 6 editions. I'm just going to talk about the first one and the last one. In the 2nd year of the reign of Ahasuerus the Great, on the 1st day of Nisan, Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin, had a dream. He was a Jew living in the city of Susa, a great man, serving in the court of the king. Now, I'm not saying this is not inspired literature. It's not inspired. It was just a person who lived in that time that interpreted it, and he put these additions to it. Serving in the court of the king. He was one of the captives whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had brought from Jerusalem with King Jeconiah of Judah. And this was his dream. Noises and confusion, thunders and earthquake, turmoil upon the earth. Then 2 dragons came forward, both ready to fight, and they roared terribly. At their roaring, every nation prepared for war to fight against the righteous nation. It was a day of darkness and gloom, of tribulation and distress, affliction and great tumult upon the earth. And the whole righteous nation was troubled. They feared the evils that threatened them and were ready to perish. Then they cried out to God, and at their outcry, as though from a tiny spring, there came a great river and abundant water. Light came and the sun rose, and the lowly were exalted and devoured those held in honor. Mordecai saw in this dream what God had determined to do, and after he awoke, he had it on his mind, seeking all day to understand it in every detail. Now Mordecai took his rest in the courtyard of Bigthan and Teres, the 2 eunuchs of the king who kept watch in the courtyard. He overheard their conversation and inquired into their purposes and learned that they were preparing to lay hands on King Ahasuerus, and he informed the king concerning him. Then the king examined the 2 eunuchs, and after they had confessed it, they were led away to execution. The king made a permanent record of these things, and Mordecai wrote an account of them. And the king ordered Mordecai to serve in the court and rewarded him for these things. But Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, who was held in great honor by the king, determined to injure Mordecai and his people because of the 2 eunuchs of the king. So you see, this is a prelude to this nice, gentle story we have of Esther. But this is the way this writer described it. Now, at the end of the book, there's another addition he put there. Mordecai's dream fulfilled. And Mordecai said, "These things have come for God. For I remember the dream that I had concerning this matter, and none of them has failed to be fulfilled. There was a little stream that became a river, and there was a light and sun and abundant water. The river is Esther, whom the king married and made queen. The 2 dragons are Haman and myself, Mordecai. The nations are those who gathered to destroy the name of the Jews. And my nation, this is Israel, who cried out to God and was saved. The Lord has saved his people. The Lord has rescued us from all these evils. God has done great signs and wonders, wonders that have never happened among the nations. For this purpose he made 2 lots, one for the people of God and one for the nations. And these 2 lots came to the hour and moment and day of decision before God and among the nations. And God remembered his people and vindicated his inheritance. So they will observe these days in the month of Adar, on the 14th and 15th of that month, with an assembly and joy and gladness before God, from generation to generation, forever among his people Israel." So it just strikes me as when you know the book of Esther and what it is, and you look at the way this writer introduced it. He must have been that lady that wrote the Harry Potter books. But the message was there to the people who understood this type of literature. It wasn't inspired, but that type of literature was common in that day. And they did understand it. We don't have that privilege, do we? I mean, they grew up studying Daniel and Ezekiel and Zechariah. I mean, studying them hard. They knew about this type of language. And we don't have that. So I guess during this time period in the 1940s, when they discovered, and we've heard people talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. And a lot of those were, like I said, nobody really claims they were inspired books of the Bible. But they were people who wrote histories And they talked about it. And a lot of those stuff they discovered in that was written in this type of language right here. And they were used to, when they knew that when it talks about the waters coming up and swallowing the earth and things like this, the earth normally corresponded to the country of Israel. The water corresponded to the nations, or to Rome coming up. And you know, this person back here that gives me a sign 3 minutes, and I said it was 30 minutes. My wife is now holding up the book and saying, get back to the lesson. And I am. Anyway, I just wanted to address this, that there are ways when you look at the day of the Lord, it doesn't necessarily mean the end of time. It means when God came to judge Jerusalem. Not necessarily that it was the stars were literally going to fall from heaven. When you look at Revelation, the 5th chapter, we recognize some of the symbology. And we said, well, that's symbol. I mean, when in Revelation 5, where it talks about the Lamb with 5 eyes and 7 horns, everybody sort of recognized that, you know, really Jesus doesn't have 5 eyes and 7 horns. But when it comes to the battle at the end, it said blood's going to run up to the horses' necks and all that stuff. A lot of people say that's true. And still, it's symbolic in what it means. It's just a type of language that you use it. And Maria, I don't have any problem with somebody who doesn't understand it like that. Just like you understand it your way. And it's very, as many people read the book of Revelation, there's probably that many people have a different interpretation of it, this other stuff. It's hard to understand it, and everybody agree on it. We don't everything agree. It's just a way of understanding, which I think makes sense. Yes. Well, I'm not tired of you asking questions. No, I'm just saying that there are things that were symbolic in that day that they understood as not being the end of the world. That's what he said. But I think God can think that he can make the world better too. Yeah, but I mean, even now, as we as Christians, we should be making the world better. Yep, we should do it. And I think it's a success. They say, Jesus said new creation has started. So, just, and I don't think that, I think what God was saying is, when he said that, well, I will never again curse the ground because of man, because their thoughts are always evil. Man's thoughts are evil. And he's saying, you know, my creation was good. Why should I destroy what is good for the sake of man who all he thinks is evil? That's the point I was trying to make. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yet God said what he did.
Right. So 100% of humankind know that, and it isn't but maybe, I mean, I always get the vibe that it's within the first year that, you know, the brothers that are going in there, you know, making fun of, first off, Noah's got himself drunk.
Yeah.
And then the brothers are making fun of him. So you've already got back in, and that's a generation, if there's an entire globe generation that should have known better was in here. And of course that happened twice. Get that same argument
But it's not just knowing, it's just the way we are.
Right.
And just, what he said right there, when all there was Noah and his sons. And he said their thoughts are continually evil.
Right.
And, he sort of said, people are going to make a mistake.
And I wonder too, he's not touching on, so how many times do I got to destroy the world, right? Like, if I'm going to destroy the world every time mankind is being wicked, listen, mankind's always wicked. So am I going to just spend the rest of, is this going to be the nature of our relationship, and I'm just going to destroy the world over and over and over and over and over? I'm not going to do that. That's not what I'm going to do.
And yet, you look at just the point you made right there, that he destroyed the world, yet the world was still there. It wasn't completely obliterated when he destroyed the world. The world was still there. And, we probably have different opinions on the new creation, things like this. I was just trying to make the point that God said his creation was good. His creation he had was good. All right. That looks familiar, doesn't it? God only asks us to do what we can. Amen. All right. All right. First slide says, we have only 5 loaves here and 2 fishes. And like the book, if you read the book, points out what Jesus did with those 5 loaves and 2 fishes to do it. That little bit, how you do with that. So find out what God would have you do and do that little task well. For what is great and what is small, the Lord alone can tell. That was written by somebody named MLR. Mary had that little poem written in her Bible. She says, this ought to apply it, did. I like it very much. All right. There's some songs that when we talk about this a little bit, we can do. There's some songs that we sing, and ones that we used to sing a lot, and songs that we sing that reflect this principle. Anybody remember that song, Brighten the Corner Where You Are? Don't remember that one. I'm pretty old. You remember that one, don't you? You remember that one. Do not wait until some deed of greatness you may do to shed your light afar. Just brighten that corner where you are, as in the little things that you can do when you have a chance. How about I travel down a lonely road? Anybody know that one? And we're going to sing that one in the service today. I traveled down a lonely road and no one seemed to care. The burden on my weary back had bowed me to despair. I oft complained to Jesus how folks were treating me. And then he said so tenderly, I also was so weary on that Calvary's road. Good song. And it goes on all through it how this guy was willing to die for Jesus. And the final verse said, if just a cup of water I place within your hand, then just a cup of water is all that I demand. Be careful, little Christian. Take up your cross and follow after me. The little things that you can do. And it's on Isaiah 6:8. Now Isaiah said, here am I, send me. There's a song about that. And some of these songs, I haven't sung them so many years, I had a hard time even coming up with a tune. And it's hard. Some of them are a little bit difficult to sing. But here am I, send me. The song is titled, Lord, send me. Or the fact that it said, oh, the things we may do, you and I. And there's things that, the other one that had room in God's kingdom. There's room in the kingdom of God, dear brother, for the small things that you can do. And I was looking this morning. We have if you ever get the chance and you're wanting to look at something, it's a website. It's called Southeastern Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And it's a huge congregation. It's got 16,000 people in it, 3 or 4 campuses. But they're not First Christian, they're just Christian. In fact, this is one of the, you ever see that book by who is that Church of Christ preacher? Rich Ackerley, something like this. It's a book that this pretty famous preacher in the church wrote with a preacher named Bob Russell, who was at that time was the minister at this Southeast Christian. And it was talking about the similarities that we have with the Christian church, things that we believe and they believe, and how we could ever just be in communion to one another again, even though we do have differences in the way we do our singing and whether we have instruments in our church or not. But they have some really good teaching. I turned it on this morning. The one that was on there last week was by a minister known as Dave Stone. And he talked about the fact that small things matter. People matter. And they're going to go into a lot of this. And he had some... he talked about... they said in Rome in about 150 A.D. and about 250 A.D., there were two great plagues that hit the Roman Empire about that time. And they said that they lost a third of their people in the first plague and a third in the last plague 100 years later. All these people died, and they were so desperate for this plague, they were even taking their family members and people who lived in their house who were sick, who weren't dead yet. They would take them out and put them by the roadside because they were too afraid of being infected with the disease that they had. And he said the church at that time we've heard stories of the church, how they would go to the dump outside Jerusalem, Gehenna, and people who didn't want children would take their children and throw them away. And the Christians of that time would go and rescue those babies. Said the Christians of this time actually rescued these people that the Romans were putting out for the street. Most of them died probably, but some of them lived. And of course, some of the Christians that did it were infected with these diseases, but they kept doing it. And they talked about the effect that this had on society. This was a time period when, the church was really growing by leaps and bounds. And this was one of the things that caused it to grow, was the way, the care they had for each other. And most of us are this way. You remember, last year when that hurricane hit Panama City. I mean, it was just devastated, and a lot of churches were just devastated. And a lot of congregations responded to help the congregations that were down there. You saw people, great caravans of people that would go in Albuquerque when we were up there. They had Calvary Chapel was a big one that did these things. They had teams of people who did. They would go down and clear out the destruction, help people build and repair and things like this. They had teams and trailers and things set up to do that stuff when they'd go. And we tend to respond to these things when there's a tornado in an area. We tend to respond to this to help people, knowing that these things have a big effect. And the purpose of this lesson, this guy was talking about that. The little things, small things matter. People matter. And talking about how that you should brighten the corner where you're at. You should look at the things that can be done right here. The 3 pew thing that we brought up. That's so important. I'm impressed with that, how that you look and see people aren't there or not there, and how you respond to that to try to contact the people that you should be there and you don't know why they're not there. People could be discouraged. Maybe a little thing. Maybe somebody has lost a job. Somebody has a sickness. somebody, all the things that cause the people to be depressed, the word I'm looking for. People that are depressed. The small things, talking to those people, and maybe not just talking, but listening to the people. A lot of times we're too good at giving advice and not enough good at listening to what they want to say. And the things that, the things that we shouldn't do, maybe. The things that, when somebody dies and we go to them, we talk to them about, well, he's in a better place. And it doesn't do any good to say that, does it, Priscilla? Doesn't do any good when you say that. I know Mary back there is visiting with us. She just lost her husband last December, I think. And when you lose somebody like that, there's not a lot anybody can say to really help. But it means a lot to them just to have somebody sit there with them and just try to feel their pain, try to have empathy with them. Yes? Having someone hug you helps. I don't know, I pinched Darlene this morning because she did have migraine. She said, I don't like pinches, I like kisses. I don't know. But there are things that you can do, that are small things, but they're really, really important things. When, and we've seen people that come into the congregation, they sit back on the back seat and they're not, they're looking for somebody to talk to them. And a lot of times we have a hard time, being the initiator of things. I have a hard time being an initiator when you do it. But it really means a lot to people when they do that. When you go up and you talk to them and really want to know what their needs are, want to know, or let them know that they're welcome to come here and be here. Yes, Mary. Well, it probably helped us more than it helped you. No. All right. Does anybody else have any examples that you want to give of things we should do that we don't do? Okay. Uh-huh. You still climb ladders? Amen. There was a preacher, he's dead now. His name was J.R. Stevens, I think is his name. I guess he composed that Hymns for Worship novel. And he got a big music company now, his son works it. But anyway, I heard him preach one time. And he was talking about a neighbor he had. A neighbor he had in a neighborhood he was at. And he said, if somebody needed something done, that neighbor was there. If they needed a yard mowed, it was a lady. She said she was there mowing the yard. She's saying if they were sick, she was there taking food to them. He said sometimes they had a neighbor that died, and they came back, and somehow the lady got in the house and cleaned it up and put food on the table. She was there. And I think she was of a different persuasion than we are. But he made a comment. Said, she may have been wrong doctrinally in some things, but she had love your neighbor down pat. And sometimes, we think more about the more important things, the weightier matters of the law versus the little things that we can do. Whether it's opening the door. I've told the story, I know when I taught a class before, but of a congregation I went to in Phoenix. There was a little man there, little guy, weighed 130 pounds and stood 5'5", and he was probably in his 60s or 70s when I knew him. His name was Maurice. And he never talked very much, but anytime you went to that building, he was there, just like Cale back here. He was opening the door for you. He was opening the door for you, and he welcomed you every time you went in. Never heard him lead a prayer. Never saw him wait on the Lord's table. But he did what he could do. And he was there all the time. And you just couldn't help but appreciate that man for doing that. And there are things we can do. And I am about to give some time back. Anybody have anything else to say? Cody, you have anything you want to add? You're going to add it later. Better be positive.
I do want to apologize when I said, oh yeah, when we talked about Esther, I said, oh, I'm not, this teaching from the book. I was thinking, my wife's name is Judy, right?
Judith.
And so I was thinking of the book of Judith. You said Esther, and I was thinking Judith.
Okay.
And I was like,
Well, I never had realized that additions that had been added until I was talking about it. I studied it this week.
And when you said that, I was like, yeah, it's crazy. There's so much.
Yeah. But we do.
5 chapters. 5 books. Yeah. So there's one chapter for the book of Esther. There's a chapter in like 10 verses or so, right?
It was 107 verses total. About 3 or 4 additions at different spots in the book that were added. It clearly marks them out. This is the addition. This is the addition.
I'm talking about, I looked at chapter 10 and 11.
Yeah.
Chapter 11 is not there in the first place. And then chapter 10 has like an extra
Yeah.
10 verses or so.
Yeah, it's interesting. It just shows how they talked in that time, and they understood it when he said these things. We don't understand that stuff, like you said. Harry Potter.
When I did the Revelation class, one of the things I did talk about was Genesis 37, where he talks about, where Joseph says to his brothers, I saw the sun and moon and 11 stars bow down on mine.
Yeah.
How he uses stars as a term to address leadership, right?
Yeah.
And of course, all the brothers got it. If we'd have read it and the brothers didn't say what they thought it meant, we wouldn't have got it. But the brothers say, so you're going to say me and mom and dad are going to bow down to you? That's the way they take it. They don't take it as the earth's coming to an end and all of a sudden the moon and stars going to hit it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it helps. I think that's why when you look at, I thought about the Ethiopian eunuch. Ethiopian eunuch was going back in his chariot, and Philip ran up to him, and he said he was reading from the book of Isaiah. And Philip got him and explained it to him. More than likely, if he was from Ethiopia, he was probably a proselyte. And he hadn't grew up like the Israelites did, reading Isaiah, reading Daniel, reading Ezekiel, read all these things. And he had a hard time understanding that, where the majority of people that lived at that time, of Jewish people, probably had a good understanding of Isaiah. Yet he didn't, because he wasn't brought up like that. And we're not brought up like that. We have a hard time interpreting this stuff, because what is just common knowledge to them, it's just like breathing, is not common knowledge to us. And we've got to learn it. And sometimes we need, we need study. We need to read people who talk about these things, and especially these books that are full of symbology as to what it understands. So I'm looking forward this morning to Cody talking about the small things that we can do, how God helps us, and appreciate y'all's attention. Hope it didn't confuse you. Yes.
If you guys want to invest in
Well, it's amazing to me talking about that Southeast Christian. There's been basically 3 ministers there. And I think it started with like 50 people. And now,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So be writing down ideas for both and bring them.
yeah. Since it's St. Patrick's Day, Mary said I shouldn't let an opportunity escape. Who is St. Patrick? What do you know about St. Patrick? Besides, he drove the snakes out. You know, the 2 things people think about was that my mind just went blank. I can think of one of them. What was the other one? He was, one, he wasn't Irish. He was from Britain. 2, he wasn't Catholic. It's St. Patrick's Day. Everybody thinks it's a Catholic holiday, but St. Patrick wasn't Catholic.
I'm a saint, I'm not Catholic.
Well, I don't know. I'll talk to Judith. All right. Thank you all for your attention. Class is yours.